I am from Center of Islamic Global Affairs, and we will have 4 speakers. But before we start, I would like to say a kind of personal story with this, because the topic of the whole of the conference. When I used to live in Palestine, I thought to go to Germany to study political theory and to learn from Western perspective and see more like what is the topics. And after studying there, I discovered something that later, of course, I learned more and more that if we as a Muslims study the West before understanding our heritage, our culture, our civilization, we will be just mainly just imitator of the West. And therefore, I do believe that reading and rereading our Turath, our heritage, our Muslim scholars will lead us to new way to think. In my field of study, for example, where I focus on ethics, for example, and politics, I could see many problems in a Western context with different theories in IR, how they undermine the role of ethics. And then later I learned how Muslim scholars look at ethics and how they, for example, see the man as a ethical being, not as a rational being. But this is all to say that I am happy to be in this part of this conference, where you're trying to go back to the Turath, to the early contribution of Muslim scholars, and to discuss like Islam from this perspective. We will have 4 speakers for this panel. This is panel number 4, and each will have 10 minutes, maximum 15 minutes. And we will start with Ustadha Zaynab Ansari from Tajsir Seminary, the USA, followed by Dr. Ayesha Syed from Ibn Khaldun University here in Istanbul. And then the third speaker will be my colleague Uveys Han from Center for Islamic Global Affairs from Sabahattin Zaim University. And finally, we will have Dr. Mohsin Zahid from Pakistan. So the floor is yours, Dr. Ustadha Zaynab Ansari.
The theme that I was given is the theme of how the Quran empowers believers and communities. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. Thank you. So the ayah that I wanted to share is from chapter 24, Surah An-Nur. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما كان قول المؤمنين إذا دعوا إلى الله ورسوله ليحكم بينهم أن يقولوا سمعنا وأطعنا وأولئك هم المفلحون. The only response of the true believers when they are called to Allah and His Messenger, so He may judge between them, is to say, we hear and obey, it is they who will truly succeed. Now, the reason why I chose this particular ayah for my reflection today is because in this ayah, even though there is a particular historical context around some of the events that were taking place in Medina at that time, this ayah has, I think, a very clear directive regarding what the sources of true empowerment are for the believers, for that community that is united around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a community that really is witness to the sending down of revelation. And I believe that these themes are especially helpful in light of what the Ummah is facing today. So I will attempt to make some parallels between the themes in this ayah and what we are witnessing today in terms of what is affecting the Muslim Ummah. We know that this is a very difficult time for the Ummah collectively, as well as many parts of the Muslim world, where our Ummah is affected and afflicted by war and genocide and poverty and suffering. So when we look at these enormous issues facing the Ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, again, it behooves us to go back to this original source of divine guidance, and to understand how this Quranic directive, how it both instructs the believers how to interact with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as how to raise and to sort of lend their voices to the solutions that are so necessary. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilizes the language of, again, as it says, أن يقولوا سمعنا وأطعنا. So that tells us that the crucial factor in the empowerment of the community of the believers is in their ability to form these cohesive ranks around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Time and time again, the themes or the threads running through these revelations, especially the Medinan revelations, are themes of solidarity, themes of community, and especially the idea that empowerment is not something that it's not something that is going to be achieved by the individual standing on their own, but this is achieved by that, again, that community that is cohesive, that community of solidarity around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And so when we consider both the experience of the Muslims and the believers in Mecca and the believers in Medina, we see that there's a very interesting and a very fascinating transformation that takes place. A transformation that takes place as the Muslims go from Mecca to Medina. In Mecca, we have these individual stories of courage. We have individual stories of resistance. We have people like Sayyidina Bilal, for example, whose story is very famous. But in Mecca, we really see these as stories of, again, of individual courage and resistance. And the transformation that takes place when the Muslims embark on the hijrah from Mecca to Medina, the transformation is really in their understanding of community and how being in solidarity with that community empowers the Muslims to a degree that they perhaps had not even anticipated themselves, nor had the Quraysh been able to anticipate. So that's why I wanted to begin my reflection with this ayah from Surat An-Nur, because this concept of سمعنا وأطعنا is animated, as I noted, by both the individual circumstances of the Muslims in Mecca, as well as the solidarity that they come to epitomize in Medina in the face of very new challenges that they certainly experience in Medina. Also, very importantly, dear brothers and dear sisters, is that from amongst these very important themes running through the Quran is the theme of a call and response. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals these ayahs around سمعنا وأطعنا, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals verses in the Quran addressing the believers, the ayahs of يا أيها الذين آمنوا, whether those ayahs are explicitly addressing the believers or the message is implicit, there is this theme of call and response, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inviting the believers into a dialogue, in a sense, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inviting the believers to really sort of reorient our lives, and to really reorient our lives and to redirect our communities in the direction of responding to this call. The ayahs of Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu are around 89 ayahs in the Quran, which is a very significant number. And so when we examine these ayahs in their aggregate, we see that the Quran presents a message of empowerment that demands of the believers that we have to uplift each other and we have to raise our voices, because the reality, dear brothers and dear sisters, is that as human beings, our role is to be interlocutors of this text, of this divine word. So we have to make sure that we are utilizing our voices in a way that there is resonance with this divine call. Now, as I was going through this ayah and some other ayahs and reflecting on this theme, I wanted to summarize 10 ways, and of course this list is certainly not exhaustive, but I wanted to summarize 10 ways that the Quran empowers believers and communities. And this is very important because for people that don't understand the language of the Quran or its historical context, if they just read the language of sami'na wa ata'na in a very surface way, they might view that as sort of a passive state of obedience that is being imposed on the believers. And that is, I believe, an incorrect way of understanding that ayah. Because in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you have numerous examples of people that were able to transcend the most difficult of circumstances. So there's a very intriguing paradox here that actually the path to empowerment and liberation in a way that the Muslims had not thought was possible actually began with that ability to submit their will to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. That ability to cultivate sami'na wa ata'na really became the dividing line between the true mu'mineen, the believers, versus the group of individuals that the Quran describes as the munafiqeen. And that was a new development for the Muslims when they encountered that group when they went to Medina. So again, in going through these ayahs in the Quran, I thought about summarizing, again, 10 ways that, beginning with the premise of sami'na wa ata'na, that the Quran empowers believers and communities. And the very first example of this, and I think this is especially important for our youth, in my work at Taysir Seminary, I work primarily with youth as an instructor, as a teacher, as a mentor. And so doing this sort of work on the ground, it's become very evident to me that many of our youth are really struggling with sort of reconciling their challenge, really kind of reconciling their faith with challenges that they experience, specifically intellectual challenges. And so the very first point that I want to emphasize here is that the Quran is not, again, sort of inviting us to sort of a blind submission, but the Quran time and time again is challenging us to think. This is a very robust engagement with our faith in the most pressing questions that are facing communities today. Okay, all right, inshallah, I'll go ahead. Inshallah, then let me go ahead and wrap this up. Again, I just wanted to summarize this. So the idea that in sami'na wa ata'na, we are bringing our whole selves in a very engaged way to this process. And then, like, as I said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is this sort of call and response to where the believer is being called upon to build a framework around what it means to be in solidarity with the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and today carrying his message forward. So it's not enough to just kind of think about this in a theoretical way, but time and time again, the Quran calls upon us to convey to the world, to implement its commands, to deal with people who are in denial and rejection, ultimately trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise that the believers will prevail. And let me just kind of go back to that first ayah, just as a reminder. Going back to that first ayah, we can see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, again, this idea of a divine promise embedded here, وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. It is they who will truly, truly succeed. So thank you so much for inviting me to address this panel. Anything correct that I said, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any mistakes are entirely my own. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow all of us to be part of this project of empowerment and upliftment of the ummah, and standing in solidarity around the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, who reminded us, there's a hadith I wanted to share, to commit ourselves wholeheartedly to the Quran. Thank you so much.
We will move now to Dr. Ayesha Syed. The floor is yours.
So as I begin with deliberations on the role of women in empowering inclusive leadership, I'm reminded of two highly empowered women leaders from recent history, Princess Diana and Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto. Their life stories are testimony enough to the illusion of women empowerment, often celebrated in icons, but undermined by systemic apartheid. If such towering women leaders could not escape the vulnerabilities of their gendered realities, what then of millions of voiceless, marginalized, invisibilized women, unheard and unseen? So today I want to reflect on how women's empowerment, not as token symbolism, but as lived holistic reality, is essential for inclusive leadership within Muslim societies. So let me begin my presentation with a verse from Muhammad Iqbal. मैं भी मजलूमी निस्वां से हूँ गमनाक बहुत, नहीं मुमकिन मगर इस वक्त आए मुश्किल की खुशबू. So, talking about women empowerment from token symbolism to lived holistic experience, let us begin with the fact, and this is also just a reminder, of course, this August House knows all these things much more than I do, but I would just like for us to be reminded that women are equal in humanness. What do we mean by that is in their individuality, in their identity, in their agency, in their autonomy, in responsibility and accountability. Then there is a further distinction awarded to or bestowed upon women by nature, which is that of motherhood. So they share the divine attribute of Al-Khaliq in procreation. So women are the guardians of the human civilization in this sense, because they have the wombs that carry forth human existence. But we also see that there are threats to procreation and family. Women's honor of procreation is undermined on two fronts. First, the weakening of the institution of family and marriage, with rising divorce rates, declining fertility rates, and changing social norms. And on the other, technological advancements, these transformations, emerging biotechnologies, even artificial wombs. So what is going to be the future of this family and procreation? We have to think about these things. Before we move on, let us be clear of what is meant by women empowerment within our house. So I established that women empowerment today means for us enabling women to exercise their full human agency, voice, autonomy, and leadership in shaping society. And also it is about dismantling barriers so women can access equitable rights, opportunities with dignity. Why women empowerment matters so much? It matters because this is not a modern slogan. This is not something that we are going to be taking from the West. In fact, this is what was enjoined upon us in the Quran itself, which affirms the spiritual, moral, and social dignity of both men and women. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the believers, men and women, are allies of one another. They enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. The rationale for empowerment is religiously grounded. It is essential for addressing contemporary challenges. And we see that the future transformations also, it depends on them. Societies that neglect the contributions of women, they put their populations at risk. So Ali Shariati says that patriarchal and colonial legacies have pushed women to the margins, silenced but exploited for their labor and wombs. So let it be very clear, that women are very proud and they take pride in whatever Islam put upon them. But in modernity, it is very sad that because of these colonial legacies and capitalistic tendencies, women have been reduced to mere baby-making machines, we can say. So in Muslim societies, when we talk about Muslim societies, what do we mean by them? This again is a non-homogeneous entity. We mean a plurality of social orders where Muslims live as communities. They could be majority, minority, or diaspora communities. And these are contexts where Islam significantly shapes social, cultural, legal, and/or political life. So we will have states with Muslim majorities, states with significant Muslim minorities, and transnational context, and the concept, the spiritual concept of the global ummah, which we see in our rituals, in our shared ibadah. So what are the building blocks of Muslim civilization? If we just look down in history, it has always been knowledge, trade, scholarship, spirituality, social justice, and this has included women in all walks and all spheres of life, not as passive recipients, but as active transmitters. So Muslim societies today, we see them split between role model contexts of relative progress versus contexts of relative regression. So we see there could be some exemplars or relatively progressive role models, such as we could say Indonesia and Malaysia maybe. And then there are the struggling and challenged contexts, and then the diaspora Muslim communities. So women empowerment in Muslim societies should be based on meritocracy. And what is meant by meritocracy is what Allah has enjoined upon us in the Quran, that indeed the most notable of you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is most righteous amongst you. So Islamic ethos was not about privilege, it was always about merit. But today we see that women's lives are shaped not only by overt exclusion, but also by internalized structures of piety and obedience. So the discourse of equality cannot materialize without dismantling the institutionalized structures of inequality. The few women who break through are exceptions that prove the rule. They succeed in spite of the system, not because of it. So I would like to look at women empowerment from a Maqasid Sharia and Maslaha approach, which is based on gender equilibrium. The key issues that, according to my research, I've been able to identify, they are issues of identity, issues of agency, issues of autonomy. And these are multi-layered, they are intersectional, race, gender, and class being some of the intersectionalities, but within different contexts, we will see different challenges and different impediments to women empowerment in Muslim societies. Although I see many of those men who are extremely supportive of women, but I would still, excuse all of you and say that a major problem within Muslim societies or a major impediment towards women empowerment is patriarchal mindsets. And I would say that these are being reproduced as colonial structures of systemic violence through both men and women. And these are colonial legacies that have been transferred to us. Then coming from Pakistan, I can say that within South Asia at least, and in other parts of the world, because South Asian Islam or Quranic exegesis have been transported to other parts of the world. So I would say that the interpretations of Quranic exegesis, they need a lot of deliberation, or they need to be rethought, maybe in the present context. I see that they have created a lot of these patriarchal mindsets, or they have been supportive of or enablers of such patriarchal mindsets within societies. I think there's also focus on quantity and oblivion of quality. So we're very proud of our numbers as Muslim communities, but what is there within these Muslim communities? We hardly ever think of them. For instance, how many of our Muslim communities, including men and women and children, are below the poverty lines? How many of them have access to basic healthcare facilities? How many of them have basic human dignity? I talked about Maqasid Sharia. Just put them in front of us and just see if they are the indicators for us of progress or development. Where do we lie within them as Muslim societies or as the Muslim world? Also, this debate about house chores as non-work, I think this is a sociological debate, but also it goes against the essence of Islam, because Islam recognizes everyone for whatever contributions they make to society. And I think this is an area that as Muslim societies, we are lacking very much in. There's also non-recognition of women's labor in childbearing and child rearing. And again, I suggest that these are issues that emerged in modernity after the Industrial Revolution and through colonial legacies, because we see that in the very first societies created by the Prophet ﷺ, or the people who were torchbearers of his society, these problems or these issues were not present over there in those societies. Then gender-based violence is a very, very foremost problem within Muslim societies as well. It is a leading cause of preventable death and injury in women. It is supposed to be a shadow pandemic because it cuts across societies at different levels. Then there is discrimination in social participation and at the workplace. There is lack of participation in decision-making roles. Yes, women are allowed social participation at a lot of levels in society, and it is encouraged also. But at the decision-making level, it is not that much encouraged. Rather, it is discouraged. And also, structures are created in such a way that because of that systemic violence, they are not able to, get to the leadership positions. Then there's economic inequality and limited access to opportunities. Just to imagine the scale of how big these economic inequalities are, according to the World Economic Forum, it will take 134 years to close the global economic gender gap. So this is not just Muslim societies, but this is the global societies at large. Then we have the educational and leadership gaps. There are 129 million girls worldwide who are out of school. Even those who are within school, I think I would not really say that we should put all the girls in school, but I would rather say that we should develop our own indigenous methods of learning. We have a whole tradition, a knowledge tradition that is comprised of non-formal education. And I think it is high time that Muslim societies pay attention to that and bring that to the fore, because that is a very rich tradition, that is an indigenized tradition, and that will really help in true empowerment. So all of these problems that I've tried to identify, these are challenges which reinforce one another. So they create a cycle of structural inequality that requires both policy reforms and cultural transformation. So I would like especially to focus for a few minutes on the empowerment within marriage and family, because as Muslim societies, what is the building block, what is the basic unit for our society? It is always going to be the family, and the family will be within a marriage system. So we need to understand that that marriage system is failing. In Muslim societies, people are turning away from it. All the statistics can be taken out to show that this trend is there. So today is the right time to decide and do something about it based on gender equilibrium, which can be defined as a state of adl, mizan, ihsan, and fadl. There should be a vision or revisioning of this institution of marriage and family, because gender relations or gender power dynamics, they are the most important issue, I think, that Muslim societies need to address. As Ali Shariati emphasized, a society which fails to awaken its women is doomed to decline because it has left half of its body asleep. So what could be principles for empowerment? Faith as the foundation, education as the key, participation as a right, collaboration as a pathway, solidarity as a way of community building. With this in mind, I would just like to make some recommendations to this esteemed house. First and foremost, what is required is an awareness and mindset shift. So there has to be a conscious effort to building this awareness. It can be done through a lot of other means, and because this forum is an output-oriented forum and CIGA is a policy and research forum, I will share some recommendations or details of these separately at a later stage, inshallah. Secondly, we need to recognize and reinstate the human status.
Last 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes more.
So women are not to be taken as docile bodies, but as full human beings with moral agency and dignity, reclaiming the Quranic declaration of men and women as ontological equals. Then household work as formal labor, it may be recognized as such. Recognition of childbearing and child rearing, as was done in the earliest Muslim societies. Then I would really recommend a group of scholars to rewrite or rethink Quranic exegesis through an inclusive group. So it should not only be men having their own deliberations on it or women, but it may be a group. Maybe such a project has not been taken upon previously, and this may be a very good project to take up. Then maternal and child health should be prioritized. While we do focus on increasing our numbers, but this is one area that we need to really think of because maternal mortality is a very, very big problem in Muslim societies, especially if I think of South Asia. There are so many statistics to prove this. Economic and financial empowerment. Without this, no other empowerment is possible. The systems of dependency, not just mental dependency, but financial dependency, they keep creating these gendered power dynamics. And this has to be addressed. Education as empowerment. And then leadership and decision-making participation, legal and policy safeguards against violence, reframing family and marriage as equilibrium, not hierarchy. So in the concluding remarks, I would just like to say that empowerment of Muslim women in Muslim societies is not about adopting foreign paradigms, but about returning to our Quranic roots. Our challenge is to redefine narratives away from conventional competing patriarchy and feminism and towards gender equilibrium grounded in adl, ihsan, and mizan.
We will move now to Uveys Han, my colleague from Center for Islamic and Global Affairs.
I want to speak a little bit about, in the few minutes that I have, about the kind of we do at CIGA and how our perspective, and especially that, I mean, my own, which has been shaped through the work that we do, focuses on the Muslim world and you know the global geopolitical of different conflicts that are now enshrouding our beautiful civilization. And what to me seems to be the main conflict of our age, especially of our generation, the generation that watched a genocide happen, is essentially a conflict, what we have come to see in the field as normalization on the one hand, versus resistance on the other. And this conflict emerges as a zero-sum game in our region between actors and interests, which push and pull in two different directions. And so when we talk about leadership and the cultivation of leadership, what we're essentially talking about at this time, at this juncture, is how do we navigate through this essential conflict. But before we can get any grip on how to revive leadership, we must understand the problematic in which we find ourselves. So what do we mean by normalization as a concept within, you know, international relations and geopolitics today in Western Asia? What normalization essentially means is that, I mean, to be generous to those who advocate for normalization, it essentially means that there is a pathway towards self-improvement of our societies and modernization of our countries by way of trading our political interests for economical development. So the idea is as follows, that through becoming aligned or adjacent to colonial and imperial powers, we will gain economic benefit, right? And through that economic benefit, we may at some point, through a cordial exchange of ideas, exert influence at the table which has been granted to us. So that I mean, philosophically, I mean, what's behind the concept of normalization is a strategy for empowerment, which essentially is best captivated by those who have migrated to imperial centers and live in imperial lands, which is basically to become adjacent to imperial power and then use that proximity as a way of trying to influence imperial thought. This strategy is advocated mostly by those actors in the Gulf who are known. They don't need to be explicitly mentioned. But it is also embodied in diaspora communities who live in the West, who move to the West, who live and labor in the West, and whose success in the West demonstrates that the idea of normalization has hope. On the other hand, there is in our region a group who are engaged in what is called resistance. And resistance is a denial of hegemony and the permanence of foreign influence in our region. There can be nothing more normalizing than moving and subjugating oneself to the imperial structures as a permanent source of power. So normalization and resistance, which form the zero-sum position, especially after the commencement of the genocide that has taken place in Palestine, requires a political judgment. And this political judgment, and the lack actually of this political judgment, is what the youth have seen, and it is a failure of our generation to have not been able to exercise political will and political judgment in this failure, and we have to take stock of that. And in our political tradition, there is something called what is called al-wahm al-siyasa, which is a faculty that is in our psychology, which allows us to make distinctions between friends and enemies. And this is the basis of political judgment in our tradition. And a lot of our scholars have shown how this wahm, this ability to estimate threats in our environment, began to dull. And one of them is taraf, which is luxury and a meaningless life in pursuit of comfort. And normalization as a philosophy and a policy in our region is basically a policy of taraf, which is a policy that tells us to trade in our political sovereignty and independence in favor of some comfort and in favor of some security, so that we may exercise influence at the table that has been set for us. So the dulling of political wahm in favor of what is thought of, or what I'm calling normalization, is the death of political meaning in Muslim society. And this political nihilism, which now affects all Islamic sects and all leadership, beginning from those who have advocated for normalization by living and laboring in the West, but then extending out as an influence all over the Muslim world. This idea of normalization is what is creating the dullness in our political wahm, our ability to make a distinction between enemies and friends, and is dulling our capability of resistance. Now, in response to this condition, Ibn Khaldun has been very clear that dynasties of greatness are made in the desert, and that the Bedouin spirit must once again descend on the Muslim world. And this Bedouin spirit that is so needed at this age requires that we reject normalization and taraf, and we adapt principles of simplicity and nomadic mobility in order to be free to resist in the face of imperial influence in our region. And I would really invite the panelists here and all of those listening to begin to theorize what is the Bedouin in our age, not as a nomadic pastoral group, but as a grouping that embodies the attributes of freedom and resistance and clarity of thought and an immediate instinctual understanding of the difference between the wolf and the sheep, and who is able to guide and protect his flock against those enemies that continue to try to threaten his life and livelihood. And I think that the lack of this capability amongst us and our leadership, and there's no Muslim group that is above the failure that we all face, requires us to try to think very carefully about what it means to theorize the Bedouin in our time. By theorizing the Bedouin, I mean asking a few very important questions, such as who are the Bedouin and what kinds of power do they exercise, resist, or disrupt? Are they mere subjects of scarcity and terrain, or initiators of violence, collapse, and renewal? Do they survive the empire, or do they threaten it? How do they reconfigure legitimacy? Is it through grabbing hold of honor once again, or genealogical connections and kinship once again, or prophecy once again? Or is it through exercising martial excellence once again? What is legitimacy for us again? Another thing that I think, another set of questions that I think are important are ones regarding the question of means. What material and symbolic resources makes Bedouin life possible and at the same time dangerous? How do mobility, lineage, tribal law, and memory become instruments of autonomy and freedom or resistance? What happens when those forms are encircled by taxation, conscription, and commodification? And lastly, I think context is very important. I spoke about context at the beginning in terms of resistance versus normalization as the grand narrative in which we live. So, what world gives rise to the Bedouin once again? And what does their presence reveal about the world's fault lines, the fault line of resistance and normalization? In what political and historical context does Bedouin power once again emerge and act? Does Bedouin life disappear with empire or return whenever sovereignty collapses? Are they a passing stage of history or a reoccurring answer to political crisis? And with these questions, I would like to basically say that the way out of political nihilism that infects all of us, and unfortunately we are the generation that did nothing in the face of genocide, we must take account and stock of how our political waham, our political judgment has become so dull, and how normalization as an ideology has infiltrated even our decisions to educate our children, right? How aspirations for sending our children into advanced, educational systems into the West has led to a situation in which we are so entangled that we cannot see the wolf for what he is. So these are the kinds of thoughts that I think leadership in the coming years and decades must answer for youth, or else be seen as being irrelevant. And I must add that this AI and technology and all these things are important. However, these are not going to excite the youth. They are a generation who grew up in technology. Technology is not something that excites them, it's something they expect. And so we need to think outside of the box, and we need to start asking from our youth how a life of purpose can be reformed after genocide, and we have to admit to them, which is hard to do, that we failed due to the fact that we were embroiled into normalization and taraf, and we lost our political waham. And we need to raise a generation that has that sharpness of thought. And without this kind of discussion, we will be in a situation of immense loss for the next decades or so. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Uwais. This is a lot of insights to think about. This is also what Carl Schmitt saying, politics is to be able to distinguish between your enemy and your friend. I think Tufan al-Aqsa force us to rethink many things, especially about sovereignty, for example, and then distinguish between the external and internal sovereignty. We can see that these Muslim majority countries, or many, or all of them, they have internal sovereignty, but in the sense of external sovereignty, Tufan al-Aqsa making us reconsidering all this reality. Thank you very much again for so much insight to think about them. Now we will move to the last presentation, Dr. Mohsin Zahid.
So we'll talk about the role of technology in empowering Muslim communities. I'm sure you must have seen, let me give you a bad news first. We're actually living in an anomaly, and I will tell you what does that mean. You must have seen this map. It's basically available on Amazon. It's a pretty old map of civilizations of last 4,000 years. So this basically entails how many years one civilization, in which year it started and then collapsed ultimately. It raises a question in my mind that what about the Muslim civilization? So I mapped through the help of AI all the civilizations of the Muslim of the last 1,400 years, and I map all this. Then I was astonished to know that 85% of the time of the last 1,400 years, Muslim civilization has been in a global or regional power situation. That's like, some statistics claim it to be 91.9%, which is about like 92%, but let's be a bit conservative, and 85% is a pretty good number for a civilization which has like 1,400 years. So interestingly, we are in that 15%. So that's an anomaly, right? And from that 85%, 37% of the time we were the global power, not just the regional power. So that's like the top of the line superpower. So it means it's not something new for the Muslims to be on the power ladder. So interestingly, then I decided what is the contribution of the knowledge by each century by the Muslim. And as you can see, the blue one is the Muslims and the orange one is the Western world. The 37%, when we were the global power, our contribution to the knowledge was the top of the line. Gradually, we declined in the knowledge contribution, and our role in the society, in the world, gradually collapsed as well. So, which basically means, if we take the correlation, it will be a very strong correlation between the knowledge contribution, which translates to technology, and being the superpower. So that was the past. Let me share something about the present. Presently, We have 2 billion Muslims. We crossed that limit in 2023, and 1/3 of that 2 million lives in 3 countries: Indonesia, Pakistan, and India. From technology perspective, the internet penetration in OIC member is 45%, which is far less than the global average of 66%. There are 2.7 billion people in the world which are still offline, not connected to the internet, and 20 millions are the Muslim, which again, it's a major portion of the population which comprises of the Muslim majority countries. And considering the population, we are 2 billion, right? We should be dominating the social media. We should be dominating the narrative, but we're not, right? For example, after October 7, the anti-Muslim YouTube comments on the YouTube spiked like 4,300%. So it basically shows our effectiveness as a large number on the social media is not that powerful enough. And the world has 270 million children out of school, whereas 180 million are from the Muslim majority countries. That is basically the present situation. But we're not focused about the problem. We are more focused about the solution, what we can do, right? Let me give you a very interesting stat. When airline was invented, it took 64 years for them to hit 50 million users. Automobiles took 62 years, telephone 50 years, electricity 46 years, credit cards 28 years, television 22 years, ATMs 18 years, computers 14 years, mobile phones 12 years, internet 7 years, Facebook 4 years, WeChat 1 year, TikTok less than 9 months. And can you imagine an app? It's a simple app which hit 50 million users in just 19 days. That's Pokemon Go. So what we're seeing here is you can see the trend. And the trend is that generational time to make an impact is being compressed into months, into even days. So that is a message for us that if we want to create an impact, which earlier took, let's say, 3 generations of 64 years, now we can do it in days, in months. Of course, it's super ideal, but there's no limitation to how we can create that impact. So opportunity for us is that if we have an idea, if we have the potential to create a global impact, we can do it. We are 2 billion, right? We need just the right strategy. We need just the planning and the right resources and the right execution. So let me give you another interesting thing. There are 2 components of power, and one is the hard power for being a factor, for being on the top stage of the world. The hard power includes technology, which is the topic of this discussion, the infrastructure and the resources. And the second one, which is really important, is which basically fuels the hard power, and that is the soft power, which are human resources and the public perception. And this is once in a century opportunity for Muslims, that this is the first time that the hard power and the soft power in the favor of the Muslims. The public perception is, after especially this Palestinian genocide, is in favor of the Muslim for the first time in the last 50 years, right? We cannot debate this, whether it was, it's not my area to talk about it, whether it was, manufactured or not manufactured, but the argument, right? But the thing is, this is the first time that the hard power and the soft power are aligning in the favor of the Muslims. If we don't use this opportunity, all the sacrifices of the Palestinian will go in vain. And that's really troubling me. We need to capitalize on this opportunity. Why hard power is the at the right stage? Let me show you. So the future is Muslim fintech has cumulative growth of 13%, which basically outpaces the general growth. Muslim fintech is going to be 161 billion to 306 billion. Dynamics of learning and earning have never been favorable. That's the opportunity, considering the hard power which I'm talking about. Now, at this moment, the flat world concept. The opportunities are limitless and it's flat. The internet, which is being used by a village, by a youth in rural Ethiopia, is the same internet which is being used by the Bill Gates. That is the same internet, the same Google. So the resource parity is gradually getting shorter. So the opportunity for the Muslims is that this flat world concept, if we don't use it now, we will lose this opportunity. We just need one brain. We just need a laptop and just the internet connection. That's it. You can serve the London market. You can serve the New York, Washington market from any rural Pakistani village. You can serve from any Indonesian. You just name anything and you'll have this. So now the opportunity is that the future billionaires are now possible based only on a single person companies. Now the concept is you don't need bigger companies. You just need one single person with the right tools, with the right internet connection, with the right technology, and he can create an impact which is like equal to hundreds and thousands of people, which were earlier. So another opportunity for us is the halal market is going to be $3 trillion. It's amazing by 2028. And of course, everything needs to be halal for us. And social media is not halal so far, right? It still has the restriction. It still has content which is not, from halal perspective, it does not comprise to the definition of halal. So I think we need a social media which is halal too. So instead of, just talking about theoretically what we can do, in a quick discussion, what I can propose is we should make a smart masjid. That masjid should be a tech hub with very free Wi-Fi, right? It should be basically at the weekend, it should become the robotics hub. It should become the AI hub, right? We have the experts, we have the resources, alhamdulillah, which can be available to the masajid. The masajid should be the incubation centers. For example, in rural villages of Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Pakistan, in India, the resources are not available. People cannot afford laptops, for example. They cannot afford internet connectivity. What we can do is, let's create a computer lab in masajid. And students come there, they learn and they earn. And when they earn, they manage their own laptop and they leave. They graduate from that incubation center. And that incubation center becomes the hub of learning, earning, and then graduating, right? So mentorship and the resources are shared. Establishing a computer lab in a masajid, I think it's not an issue. If masjid can be established, let's say by $200,000, a lab only needs probably $5,000, just like 2-3% of the whole masjid. That's not something which is really difficult to do. And of course, Muslim fintech is going to be 161 to 306. We discussed that earlier. This empowerment through fintech is really important because economy runs on the finances, and this is the first time, this is the first time in human civilization that the monetary system is being decentralized. That decentralized finance is basically the future, which we can really use for this purpose. And the next one is microfinancing for the youth, especially for the women who are at homes, they cannot leave. For example, we are running a platform for the women who work from home, and we arrange their market, we arrange them their products, their marketing. We do almost everything. They just manage from their homes. They don't need to have some, hijab issues or niqab issues or the social stigma and taboos and all that. They work from their homes and we support them. And the last one is that we need to have, 180 million student out of school in Muslim countries only. That's a major burden for us, right? In 10 years, where will these 180 million people will be, right? We need to get them not in the school. We need to get them educated. Schools cannot, from my experience, from my understanding, schools cannot cover the 180 million people. It's too big number. Schools cannot cover that. We'll have to be unconventional to that. And that is basically the IT-based replacement, that we need apps, we need platform, we need portals which support these children wherever they are, in the schools, in the markets, working on the workshops and all that. So I think these 6 are important points which we do to reduce our sort of reluctance to technology in Muslim world.
I will open the floor to anyone from the participant here to comment or to ask a question or to say something related to the topics. We will start with Uveys, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in Fadi. And really, I really enjoyed my co-panelists and their presentations. But I wanted to ask Ayesha, Dr. Ayesha and Dr. Zahid a few questions. For Dr. Ayesha's presentation, usually, I feel very insecure in responding to presentations about gender and women's issues, but I think that you, because I know you very well, you actually invite engagement. So I I will ask you a few questions that are on my mind. Number one is, how do we deal with the fact that we are now living through almost a century of women's empowerment, right? Where, I mean, not all, I mean, let's just be straight. Okay, it hasn't penetrated Muslim society fully and deeply as it should have. There's still lack of education and opportunity for many women in Muslim world. However, a lot of them do have opportunity and privilege and education. I mean, population wise, we have a large number of educated women. And as you rightly pointed out, we also had women leaders, for example, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, and other places in the Muslim world. I don't know if I'm a pessimism or if it's the mood of the age, but I don't really see this going anywhere. Like, okay, keep aside the lack of penetration, keep aside those millions of women who haven't had the opportunities that the privileged few have had, but the privileged few have been terrible, because they have been a parcel of the dysfunctional and oppressive societies that we experience today. The elite women who are educated in our societies participate in the genocide that we are all a part of. So I don't understand how getting more elite women is going to alleviate our problem. Giving them more education is just going to turn more genocidal monsters, for example. I know it sounds weird, but that's the situation we live in now. So I don't see how all this women's education has created a more peaceful world. In fact, we're going more and more towards, a world of lack of sovereignty, more taraf, more, disillusionment, more pessimism, nihilism. So where's the solution there? So that's number one. All the statistics that you mentioned, by the way, Aisha, I mean, I know I want to acknowledge the fact that you mentioned the family life is falling apart, fertility is falling, etc., etc. So that's one issue. I just don't see logically how by giving more women education, we're going to have stronger families. I just don't see how that's going to happen. So number two, Dr. Zahid, I'm excited, so don't take my excitement as any kind of aggression or certain. But the same concern goes for Dr. Zahid. Like, okay, yes, we don't have internet penetration for over 50% of the population. Okay, yes, we don't have access to technology and internet, but what has the little internet penetration done for us anyways? Like, I don't see how the 20% of penetration, which is, by the way, because we have 2 billion people, it's millions of people who have access to the internet, who have access to technology, who have access to education. I just don't see how that's benefiting anybody. So if we take on and we give, like, instead of 40% of the Muslim world, we give 60% or 80% of the Muslim world technology, it's just going to be a whole bunch of Uber apps and a whole bunch of nonsense. I mean, that's what I see coming out of it. I don't see anybody. I mean, we've got people who are educated, who are doing this work. They're not doing anything. So why is giving the rest of the people? I mean, we had Kareem out of Pakistan. Like, really? Like, that was the greatest invention? You know what I mean? Fintech, by the way, I don't know. Is it a source of economic liberation for us? It kind of seems like a gimmick to make us more capitalistic, to be honest with you. So,
Okay,
but
right.
I have a concern about this idea of modernization and penetration in both the arguments that were put by Ayesha and Dr. Zahid. And I just want to I would like to hear their response to that.
Okay, we will collect more question. I just need to read one question for Zaynab Ansari that came from YouTube, that in the time the Prophet Muhammad, when the Wahy was revealed, the Prophet Muhammad was there to make a context, to interpret the Quran. So, and that is easy to say, yes, we heard and we obey. But who can do this rule in the modern time nowadays? Okay, we will go to the next question. Dr. Safi, yes, please.
This is basically to respond to Dr. Uweys and to his question, what would that do? Well, look, he did this for me. He asked me to distinguish between the sheep and the wolf, and I did. I took a position. So just because you're not aware of who's going to listen and who's going to react positively, that doesn't mean it's not happening. It is happening, and I'm the proof right there in front of you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question or comments? Okay, then we can start with Sister Ansari.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. So I think my understanding of the question is that what would be the criteria for our implementation of this particular ayah that I mentioned from Surah An-Nur. So I think a couple of things I want to say here. First of all, going back to the Asbab al-Nuzul, going back to the occasions of revelation around that particular ayah, I think might be helpful in understanding the question or answering the question. So in particular, there are a couple of things that were stated about why this ayah was revealed. In one case, there was perhaps a dispute between a companion and someone who maybe was from the Munafiqeen, or another in another version of this. Of the occasions of revelation, it was mentioned that perhaps there was a dispute between two individuals. Maybe I think one was a Muslim and the other was a member of the Jewish community of Medina. It's interesting. I think in both cases, one of the individuals was very confident about going to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to actually have that dispute adjudicated. Whereas the other individual, this was really one of the Munafiqeen, their reaction was, why should we go to the Prophet? Peace be upon him, he's not going to judge between us fairly. So that is the immediate historical context. Now, to answer the question, I think the advice of the companion Ubadah ibn al-Samit, I think, is helpful here in understanding what does this mean, sami'na wa ata'na, within our context. And so this is narrated from Ubadah ibn al-Samit when he was passing away, that he said about what does this mean, listening and obeying. He said, listen and obey. What it means is when times are easy and when they are hard. So listen and obey when times are easy and they are hard. When you feel like doing it, when you feel the motivation, and when you don't. You train your tongue to speak the truth and do not go against those in authority